The second half of 2023 was meant to be a new golden era of RPGs. We had, of course, Baldur's Gate 3, Starfield, and now Cyberpunk's expansion, Phantom Liberty. But it feels a little bit hollow. It didn't quite pan out how everyone expected, because Starfield kind of stuck out like a sore thumb. People did not enjoy it as much as they were expecting. I think if you compare the three games, Baldur's Gate 3 is the one on a pedestal. People see it as the best. There's not a lot of discussion there. It is seen as maybe Game of the Year. But it's Starfield and Cyberpunk where it gets more interesting. Which one is better? Because both of them had a rough initial reception. But I'm now seeing a lot of comparisons. People saying that CD Projekt Red's effort is much better than Starfield, and they've embarrassed Bethesda. Bethesda are pathetic, and they need to go back to the drawing board. So I do want to speak about the arguments for both sides. Which is better? Are Bethesda past it? Are they letting their fans down? And have they got nowhere to go? Was Fallout 76 the downfall? And Starfield is just continuing that? It's interesting to think about. I do think that Starfield is mediocre, perhaps in comparison to some of their older titles. If I think back to Morrowind, even Fallout 3, Skyrim to an extent, they are better games than Starfield, I think, overall. And that comes down to Bethesda not focusing on their strengths with Starfield. But I don't think all the arguments are necessarily in good faith. There is a bit of, I suppose, disingenuous discussion going on, which is motivated by a few factors. So starting out, I'm going to give both sides of this the benefit of the doubt. I'm going to talk about maybe the strengths or the arguments for Starfield being a good game, and then the same for Cyberpunk, and we'll see at the end which one is better, if we can say that. It's all subjective, but I think it's worth talking about. With Starfield, the issue I see is it all began when Microsoft bought them out. If I go back to when I was a kid, and this is in the days of the Super Nintendo, the Nintendo 64. We're talking a long time ago. We're talking boomer territory here. But the Nintendo 64 versus PS1, that for me, at least in my era, was the first time that people started to treat gaming like a team sport. You're probably in a position, if you're not some rich spoiled child, you were probably only able to get one of those consoles if you were lucky as a kid. You begged for it for Christmas, and maybe it was delivered to you. If not, you had to go to your neighbour's house and stay there, play it. It was the only way you were going to get onto these games. So the Nintendo 64, it had some good titles. It had a lot of great platformers. Certainly not RPGs. If you look that up, you cannot find any. It's a really rough story, a rough era for them. But on the PS1, they had all of those sorts of games. You had Final Fantasy VII. And if your neighbour, perhaps, had Final Fantasy VII and was playing it, you're at home with your Nintendo 64, what are you going to do? You're probably going to tell yourself that Final Fantasy VII's not that good. It's not that great, because I'm happy here with my Nintendo 64. A lot of people will tell themselves that the console or the device or whatever they have is good, and they made the right choice, because they maybe only could choose one of these consoles, and it was the same again for the Xbox, PS2, the GameCube. The GameCube's it's a good device. It was just a little bit undercooked, I would say. Same again as you go down the road, the Xbox 360, the PS3. People chose one, they go online, they keyboard warrior on different internet forums, wanting to feel like they picked the one, and they treat these companies like Microsoft, like Sony, to some extent Steam, maybe not in the same way, but that is something that happens. But more so Microsoft and Sony, they treat it like these people care about them, these companies care about them. It's a team sport, our team's got to win. And that has flown through, I think, to Starfield. It's the same story, where a lot of people found out that Microsoft had bought Bethesda and they were no longer going to be getting the Elder Scrolls, they weren't going to be getting Fallout anymore, and they also weren't going to be getting this exclusive, this new IP, Starfield. You remember there was a lot of coping going on around that time where Microsoft supposedly bought Bethesda because they wanted to make money off the games and they didn't care what platforms they were on. It's not as if they would spend billions and just hoard the games, right? No, they were going to put them on Sony platforms. People actually believed that up until the last minute when it was absolutely confirmed that Sony were not going to be getting any of these titles. They weren't going to be on PlayStation. When that reality sunk in, I guess, for fans of PlayStation, I think there were a lot of people who just wanted to go in hating Starfield. Now, I want to clarify something. I don't care about consoles. I moved away from them a long time ago because I wanted more of the open platform that I get on PC, and it means I can consolidate all my games, right? Except for Nintendo, that we're not even going to go there. But I can consolidate my games, and I like that. I think it's the same for a lot of PC players. And I do appreciate that Microsoft didn't lock all their games to the Xbox. I think if they did that, they know themselves it may have killed a whole section of AAA gaming. People would have continued to move away from it if it wasn't all available on PC. So, appreciate them putting them on the computer, but I don't think they really had a choice. They had to do it if they were going to remain competitive. So you've got Starfield on PC, you've got it on Xbox, but it's not on PlayStation. So the PlayStation players, they're angry about it. Again, I'm neutral. I don't really care. I could buy a PS5 if I wanted to. I'm just not that interested because they've started to port their games to PC as well. I'm happy to be patient. But if you've only got that console and you maybe you're younger, or you're a 35-year-old man who's still obsessed with Sony and you're not willing to try different things, I'm sure there's both crowds. That's probably where the reception kind of started. People who went in not wanting to like Starfield. And then they were somewhat, I suppose, encouraged by the fact that the game actually wasn't that great. But it wasn't that bad. It's not that bad. I still continue to play it. It just wasn't that great. It wasn't a game of the year. It's no Baldur's Gate 3. It's probably not even a Skyrim, which came out at a time where what they were doing was quite innovative, at least on console. There weren't a lot of those open world games. We see something like Breath of the Wild. It took inspiration from Skyrim, and you can't really believe that now because there's so many similar titles like Breath of the Wild. They're open world, there's dungeons all over this map that you can go and explore, see that mountain, all of that crap. You can just do that now. It's a basic game feature, but back on the Xbox 360, that era, Skyrim was innovative. Years and years pass. Fallout 4 was just another sort of Skyrim. It felt like a bit of a reskin. It wasn't too innovative. Bethesda haven't sort of done a lot. So with Starfield, it simply didn't play to Bethesda's strengths. It didn't have the exploration, and that is a very big thing. It's a bit of a mix, right? So the disingenuous nature of the discussion, but also Starfield just simply lacking. I think that's okay. Not every game has to be absolutely incredible, and I do actually commend Bethesda for trying to take a risk. It would have been so easy for them after Fallout 4 just to go and make the next Elder Scrolls. I thought they were probably going in that cash-grabby direction when Fallout 76 came out. I'm still puzzled by that game and what actually went into it, because I read sometimes that it was just another studio who made it, spent all the time on it, and it was more like a spin-off. And I assume that Todd Howard sort of got involved in the marketing, so people just felt like it was a real Fallout and it wasn't just something they'd kind of palmed off. But I don't really know, because Starfield took so long to come out. If it was in development for 8 years, it's quite troubling to me. I don't see a world where they can see Starfield as a success if it took that long to be developed, because it still feels undercooked. And we're coming up to 10 years that it was in the oven. So if that's the case, I'm concerned. I'd almost prefer that they did go all in on Fallout 76 and it was just a disaster, and then they moved to Starfield and it took sort of 5, maybe 4 years to actually develop. I'd be okay with that, because I'd think, yeah, I mean, in 2023, 4 or 5 years isn't a heap of time, it seems like, for AAA games. So if they went out, developed a new IP in half a decade, that's probably okay if they don't get it quite right. But 8 years, I mean, a lot of people would be thinking of the opportunity cost there, where they could have made an Elder Scrolls or another single-player Fallout, and instead they went for that new IP. But forgetting all of that, if we just say they had a reasonable time to develop this game, they had a little bit of a hit and miss with Starfield, It's a new IP. They tried new things. They didn't just try and copy Skyrim and Fallout and just make it a reskin in space. They did try and do their own thing. I was very concerned years ago as soon as I heard the word procedural generation. Alarm bells go off for me when I hear that, because I want handcrafted content. Anything randomly generated, I think sometimes the developers get hung up on these incredible systems that they build, and I think building procedural generation, that's got to be very fulfilling. It's got to be amazing to build something where it's maybe not necessarily the same every time, and you as a developer don't even know what's going to come out of it. That must be exciting. I don't know the ins and out of it, but if that's the case, if that's how it works, that must be pretty cool. But as a player, I simply don't care. As soon as I know something's randomly generated, I know that it doesn't really matter. I'm not going to find anything truly exciting. I'm not going to find the peak of the game. It's just something that has to be inconsequential because of the fact that it's random, and not every player is going to see it. Other players may never see exactly what I see. It's totally random. I lose interest there. I think it's the same for a lot of people. They don't want to explore because you know you're not going to find anything interesting. You're going to find, at best, a copy and pasted dungeon with enemies. At worst, you're going to find a cave or something with nothing in it. Not good. And that's sort of where you get with Starfield. Cyberpunk, when it came out, on PC, I thought it was good. It was a scam job on console, especially Xbox One, PS4. I saw the footage. I didn't personally play it, but I'm happy to give people the benefit of the doubt that it was absolutely a con job. Of course, as time went on, the game did get fixed, but I think there were a lot of people when Cyberpunk came out who were really hyped. They treated it like it was going to be the best thing ever. CD Projekt Red's marketing, partly responsible, but certainly there were a lot of people on the internet who convinced themselves it was going to be this incredible thing, which didn't make sense to me because The Witcher 3 was good, but it didn't really do anything massively innovative. It came at a time where games were very focused on that service element. There weren't a lot of really great ones, and it was a game that did things well. It had good quests, it had good writing, but I don't think the gameplay was necessarily special. To see them pivot to an FPS Deus Ex-like with an open world, driving, vehicles, I think that was quite ambitious. And what they've done with 2.0 to get it into a pretty good state, I think that's really promising. It's the sign of a developer that is talented and should go on to do good things. There's not many developers who can pull something like that off and ensure it's really good. You think about Ubisoft with Watch Dogs. Is Cyberpunk a better game than Watch Dogs? Absolutely. And Ubisoft, I don't think, had a lot of experience with sort of cities and cars and driving to that extent. Far Cry aside, which does a little bit of it. But I don't think that CD Projekt Red should be embarrassed at all with Cyberpunk. It was good even at release, I think. It was worth playing on PC. Much better now. The issue I see, though, is when people start to compare the two, so when we come back to the Starfield versus Cyberpunk argument, when people are comparing them, they don't really look at the RPG systems. They're not going, right, which RPG is better? They are just looking at which game's presentation is better, and therefore the game's better. I don't personally agree with that. I like a lot of janky games, a lot of European titles that are often older, that I think if you sort of strip away the cobwebs, they are quite amazing in some cases. You have some really good moments, alongside maybe a little bit of frustration every now and then. But I can ignore that if the overall game is great. And so I think when I see videos that sort of compare graphics and maybe shooting your gun in the air, do the NPCs run away? If I punch the NPC, does it die or does it stand there? If I hold a gun out and the NPC's in their car, do they try and run me over, or do they just simply sit there like I'm not there? I get that's immersion breaking, but if you're developing a role-playing game with choices, consequences, systems, good combat, good exploration, at some point you do have to prioritize, unless you're happy to sit in development for 12 years, which, let's face it, it doesn't happen. At some point it's going to be forced out the door, and people are not going to be happy if you release a game where everything is half-baked. You've got to have some areas that are great and maybe some areas that are weak. You're never going to get a game that's perfect in any area, because that's the case with anything. Nothing is perfect. So I don't really like those comparison videos. If it's for a laugh, that's fine. But I think some people do take it seriously, and it comes back to the people who treat consoles and platforms as a team sport, where they feel like, ha ha ha, Starfield has made another blunder. I made the right choice getting a PS5. Sony's going to be good to me. Jim Ryan, who's just left, he's going to be good to me. And then the same with Microsoft, where they maybe oversell how good Starfield is and they convince themselves that everything's fine. It's a little bit in between. I do think Starfield's a good game. I do think Cyberpunk's a good game. Which one is better? In my opinion, certainly right now, Cyberpunk is better. But again, you're comparing it 2 years later, and I don't think a lot of people are taking that into account, because they probably didn't really go through Cyberpunk years ago because they got deflated with the hype. Even if they bought it, which a lot of people did, people may not have actually gone through the whole experience. I'm happy I went through it to see what it was like, and I'm replaying it again now to see those changes. I don't think it's fundamentally changed. I think some people are really exaggerating the improvements. 2.0's got some cool stuff, but it is essentially the same game with that expansion content. That is very good from what I've seen so far. So there is good stuff. If we're ranking this year's RPGs, again, obviously Baldur's Gate 3 at the top, but I haven't even really mentioned it because there's no discussion there. It's just simply better. And then you're going to have Cyberpunk, the expansion. I think that's better overall than Starfield as a game. Starfield's sitting at the bottom, but they're all good. I do think that we need to appreciate this little area of games that we've had. We can't look back in 2 years and think, you know what, that period was actually okay. I think we didn't make the most of it. We didn't appreciate it, because it's very easy that in a year's time, we're not going to see those. We're not going to get a Larian game of at least this scale again for probably 10 years. They've talked about making something smaller scale, but I mean, I'm 29 now. I'm going to probably be 40 years old by the time they release another full-fledged product of the scale. So I'm trying to appreciate it. It's the same for others. Starfield's going to get expansions, sure, but Elder Scrolls 6, where's that? It's going to be 6 years away. So if you're playing that game and you enjoy doing nice quests and maybe not exploring to its fullest extent, but at least exploring decent handcrafted areas, which there are a lot of, hopefully you can get something out of that as well, because you're not going to see anything of Starfield scale for ages by Bethesda. Maybe we get some clones, some different stuff, but you've got to keep that in mind, that sometimes you do have to appreciate what we actually get. You don't want to treat it all as a team sport. Don't necessarily. There's other arguments I haven't even gone into. I'm not going to drag this on too long, but there's certainly people who want to, I suppose, be all in on that hype and that initial discussion period where something's the greatest ever, and if it doesn't live up to that, it was no good anymore. I'm not interested. You don't really want to do that either. You've got to appreciate the game for what it is, and I'm trying to do that with Starfield. So the title of this video, I give it to Cyberpunk, but you should appreciate both. It doesn't really matter. They're both decent games. I imagine most people who just go in knowing what to expect, not trying to make it a game that it's not, trying to find jank and overdoing the comparisons. If you do that, it's probably not going to be enjoyable. But I'm liking both. I want to see RPGs succeed. I want to keep seeing them come out, support them, and I'll be doing it with Starfield. Yes, I bought the early access because I wanted to jump in straight away. I don't really like that sort of monetization, but I will say, a little off topic, but I will say if a game has to be monetized to some extent beyond the box price, I would prefer the early access to anything else, because the early access is not going to influence the game's design, hopefully, whereas microtransactions will. They will develop the game systems around you spending money, which completely destroys it. So I'm okay with the early access as a way for me to say I am willing to pay double or 50, 60% more for your single-player game if it's really good. I'm willing to do that. But I'm not willing to even give a chance to a game that's got those microtransactions, especially if it's single-player. So something to keep in mind. But I hope you can enjoy these RPGs. Hopefully we get more. Thanks so much for listening, and I'll see you next time. Cheers. Bye.